Welcome to the Los Angeles Sentinel Daily Brief. This is where we talk Black and talk back to the headlines that are impacting the Black experience. I'm Niele Anderson, and here's what you need to know for today. Preserving Black history has always been a challenge for African Americans due to the horrific plight of slavery. Joining me now are the descendants of a family that discovered their history in a Bible. Richard and Denise Diggs. How did you discover the Bible, and how far does it date back?
Well, it dates back to 1844, which is when our grandfather was born, so I would say. We believe he started writing it sometime probably in the 1860s. When he was in his 20s. It was discovered by my brother and his wife, who were visiting with my mother, and she was actually having books donated from her father, my grandfather's library, and she had them boxed up, and my sister-in-law, Carlotta Diggs, my brother's wife, asked if she could go through the box to see if there was anything she might want to read. And she found Bible, which was just a brown-bound leather book. But she opened it up and saw the pages in the center with dates of the 1800s. And then she took it into my mother and my brother and said, "We need to look at this. These are dates during slavery." And my mother looked at it and realized the first entry was her grandfather.
And so, Richard, so you were there in the moment where the Bible was discovered. What was the initial thing that stood out to you?
I was really kind of overwhelmed with the opportunity to have something like that in our family. This connects us to a past that we didn't even know existed and know where and how things occurred, places, dates, times, births, deaths.
What were some of the things that stood out to you in the Bible?
Probably the dates, and realizing that those were not dates of my mother's generation or even my grandfather's generation, but before. For my lifetime, I only knew of my grandparents and had a general idea of when they were born and when, they got married. But to see a date as far back as 1844 was shocking, to know that there was something written about someone who had lived in that time.
Right.
Outside of a history book that you might see in a library, and someone connected to us that had lived in that time that now we had a name attached to. Richard is a name that's been passed down in our family. They knew of him. My mother, of course, knew, but I didn't.
Okay. Being
the youngest of her children, it didn't have any real connection for me until I saw those dates.
What stood out to you in the Bible?
The names. I didn't realize initially how that name got in the Bible. And I argued with one of my aunts, the youngest of my mother's sisters, about the fact that this person didn't exist that she thought did. And I said, "Aunt Helen, there's not a Virginia." She said, "Dickie, I've been to her house. I played with her children. There's a Virginia."
Okay.
I looked at the Bible this one way, one time, and realized that the name I thought was Jimmy was actually Jenny, Ginnie, which was the nickname for Virginia. And of course, I apologized profusely to my aunt after that.
As you should.
As I should, that you were right, Aunt Ellen. She said, "Oh, I know I was right." And then the other names that were not common today. There's a Perizod, who's our great-great-grandmother on our great-grandmother's side, and her life. Because my great-grandmother was born when she was 38 years old, when her mother was 38 years old. And I thought, wow, she had a child in those days at 38, which was kind of maybe normal, but today it's even kind of rare that women would wait that late in life to have children. So those little things about the names, and then how he named the children and why he named the children. First child was named Richard after him, that he had out of wedlock when he was 16 years old. And he had a relationship with a woman who was a servant of a plantation owner named Lang in Alabama. And then shortly after that, he left there and came back after the war.
Two things when I heard this story. Number one, that first of all, they say that Black people couldn't read and write during that time. And so this is a generational thing that kept going within your family. And how some people don't realize that this is how we kept our records and the history of Black people in this country, kind of like the Underground Railroad. It was in the Bible.
Yes.
And the white man didn't never look in the Bible.
Right.
But the whole history of your family was there. Was there a story within the Bible that maybe touched your emotions, broke your heart, or just tugged on you a little bit that kind of still stays with you now?
It made me think about what his life must have been like and how he came to have even the ability to purchase a Bible and then write in that Bible and keep it for as long as he kept it. I think that's what made me emotional when I saw it in the Smithsonian.
What about you?
Little Henry Collins. He had the first child, Richard, then, of course, Virginia. And then the next child was Henry. He passed away at about 3 years of age. And that was, in my mind, because I lost a daughter. And so my great-grandfather and I connected on that level of emotion and pain and grief. How he must have processed that in those days when he had so many other things going on in his life as well. And then the choice to go west as opposed to north. Because after the emancipation, 4.3 million slaves moved up the Mississippi River to the northern states. And I, for long, just couldn't put together why he wanted to go west. But I think if I'm thinking like him, the whole time from Jamestown, Virginia, until he arrived in California and all the stops in between, was a movement of the people from that area to Texas. They all needed to get to Texas, and particularly Robertson County area of Texas, because that was a huge, industry for cotton. And so they could use cotton as a kind of a transportation method. I believe my great-grandfather moved about every 6 to 8 months from about 1878 until he arrived in California by meeting or being at the time cotton was coming into production. So they would move in between those times and they'd arrive at the next point when the cotton was being produced because they could get jobs. And they'd save their money, and then they'd leapfrog again to the next place. But that's how the strength and the desire of my family at least, to get out of that environment of the South.
Where's the Bible at now?
It's in the National Museum of African American History and Culture in Washington, D.C.
How did you connect with the Smithsonian? How did that happen?
I started with my sister.
So I was watching a program on PBS, and Lonnie Bunch was giving an interview about them just receiving funding for building the library or the museum. And he said in the interview that they were looking for historical artifacts from families in this country. So I talked to my brother, and then I talked to my sister, and we decided that, yes, we should do it.
In 2014, I was accepted in the Black Theater in Washington, D.C. To do a play that I had written about my great-grandfather's life. And it's really kind of funny. In the last of the play, I go out and I met the lady from the Smithsonian and gave her the Bible, and the audience was like, "Oh, what are you doing?" I said, "I'm giving her the Bible." "But it's your family." I said, "But no one's going to see it, but maybe 3 or 4 people in my family.
Right.
Now you all here are going to be able to see it."
I've been to the African American Museum, and it takes a couple days to just get through. It's a lot to digest.
It is.
So we know the bottom floor is basically about Africa, the slave trade. Right. So I'm assuming that the Bible is on the second floor?
It's on the first floor.
Oh, it's in the slavery.
If you go right around past Thomas Jefferson's statue and the cabin, there's a little alcove, and it's just a little half-moon alcove. And in there's a section on faith and slavery.
What has the Bible done for your family? Has it been an impact? Has it brought your family closer together?
It's certainly
much closer.
Sparked a lot of conversation where a lot of people in our family are talking about their own memories of their growing up in this family and things they remember. We're on Zoom calls pretty regularly now, talking about all of these things.
And we get calls. I got a call from our oldest cousin.
Yes,
about
Joanne.
The mother, our great-grandmother's mother, Perazon. Because something just hit a note in her mind and she wanted to find out about her. And I said, well, all I know is where she died other than her birth and her death. She died in Grayson, Texas County. So I tried to get a death certificate before, so I'm going to try again. Okay. And I tell everybody, it's fluid. As much as you think you've done all the research and everything is complete, it really never is complete. There are moments in time that are lulls where there's no information available and you just kind of put it to the side. But then as soon as there's a name or some kind of connection, everything kind of comes alive again. Fortunately, the story he wrote, everybody says, well, it's authored the names and dates and births. Yeah, but there's a story there. And you have to fill in the pieces of the story, like Jenny. That was a piece of a story that took a while to actually evolve to where I understood what that meant. When I found his headstone, well, both my great-grandmother and great-grandfather's headstone really shook me in the sense that I could touch something that was his, and he was right below that. I know him. If I walked in the room, I'd know him.
Wow.
Because I know so much of him.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and there's so many things that you find when you're studying an individual person for so long and trying to understand their thoughts and their movements and what drives them and motivates them. Eventually, you know that person. Yeah.
Is there any thoughts about a movie?
Well, if my
About the
sister
Diggs
writes
family?
a book, she's
I'm writing the book.
in the process of writing.
I am
Writing
writing a book about it. Yes.
Any title? You thought about the title?
I
yet?
have. The title will be called When We Pass. I believe that when we pass away, we never really leave as long as people are talking about us. I just felt like it encompassed everything that we're talking about, from my great-grandfather all the way to my mother and then us, you know, and the legacy we leave behind. And what is that legacy? And will people know about it if we never talk about it? Mm. I mean, for our ancestors, they weren't allowed to have a legacy to speak of. But we do have the tools and we do have the freedom to find out and to talk about our family history and to be proud of our family history, to share it, to, you know, celebrate it. And it's a shame that it takes something like this to really make people think about it, because in our day-to-day lives, it doesn't really cross our minds much until somebody says, tell me about your family, you know, and then all of a sudden it's like, oh, well, let me tell you what I know. So now I hope it does spark that interest for everyone who sees it and everyone who hears about it, to know that whatever your background may be, that there's some information out there. Try to find it. And if you can't find anything, start with you.
Right.
And your immediate family.
So I love that you're going to write the book.
Yes, ma'am.
You're going to write the screenplay for the movie.
I'm sorry.
He's not quite sold on that yet, Niele, but keep working on it.
You must have heard the part where I'm not a screen. I don't write screenplays.
Well, he did it.
Your ancestors are going to blow that wind.
I know.
And you're going to do it.
That's what I said.
I do think about it. I got to be honest. I do think about it because these are our stories, and no one can corrupt our stories. If we let other people give their terminology, their ideas, their opinion of us, then we have to live with what they define as who we are. But this is our story, and no one can take it away from us. I say that. One reason the Bible is there is to dispel all these theories that black people couldn't read, couldn't write, couldn't be educated. My whole family, from my great-great-great-grandmother Sylvain, who was the matriarch of the family in the Bible, her daughter Sarah, her son Richard, all of them could read and write. Mm-hmm. And they taught one another. And I don't know how many other people they taught to read and write. I just know that came through my family. But they were slaves on plantations. My thoughts are there were many slaves coming out of the plantations that they were on that could read and write. But that story of him fighting back and pushing it back against the system, do you know how much he had to hide the fact that he could read and write? How he had to hide it, conceal that Bible?
Right.
Because that was a death sentence. So those kinds of things, I think, are the stories we have to tell about our own lives and our own people.
So before we go, Richard, you had a call to action. You might have some possible descendants here in the Los Angeles area?
Yes. My grandfather's oldest sister, the one I mentioned about named Jenny, who actually her name was Virginia, married Morgan White in Alabama, but they moved to Los Angeles, and they had probably 6 or 7 children. And I believe that descendants of probably in our generation, or maybe even younger, are still here that may be related to them, and I would certainly love to get in contact with them. So if there's anyone out there that may know someone that was descended from Morgan White or Virginia White,
or Virginia Collins, which was her maiden name,
please contact the station, and hopefully we can connect and find out if you are a part of the family where you fit.
Do you have an email that you want them to contact?
I do. It's Little, Little, W, D as in David, U as in Union, B as in boy, Y as in yellow, at Verizon.net.
All right. And what makes this story so beautiful is that it's all found in the Word of God. For the latest in Black news, you want to visit lasentinel.net. I'm Niele Anderson, and you have just been debriefed.